We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Overnight at COP29, the United States and the United Kingdom signed a new agreement for civil nuclear reactor collaboration. The UK Labor government has stated the agreement is, and I quote, expected to also be signed by Australia, and it will, quote, speed up the deployment of cutting-edge nuclear technology to help decarbonise industry and boost energy security. Can the Acting Prime Minister confirm Australia will sign this civil nuclear reactor agreement?
Order. The member for Fisher is warned. I don't want people interjecting, and I don't think anyone wants people interjecting before a minister or the Acting Prime Minister speaks. The Acting Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. I can confirm that the Australian government will not be signing that agreement. For Australia, pursuing a path of nuclear energy would represent pursuing the single most expensive electricity option on the planet. For Australia, pursuing a path of nuclear energy would be pursuing a path which would see $1,200 added to the household energy bills of each household in this country. For Australia, pursuing nuclear energy would be pursuing a path which wouldn't see any new electricity into our grid in 20 years. For Australia, pursuing a path of nuclear energy would be pursuing a path which would only see, at best, 4% contributed to the electricity grid 2 decades from now. Because we do not have a civil nuclear industry, this agreement does not apply to us, pure and simple.
Give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. What measures is the Albanese Labor government introducing to provide secure, well-paid jobs to help with the cost of living? What is standing in the way of this and other cost-of-living measures?
The call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her service. Last week, I attended the Regency Park campus of TAFE SA, where the government made announcements about a couple of new programs in training which included more apprentices for AUKUS. And this was the next step in a set of policies which was really underpinned by the announcement that the Prime Minister made 3 weeks ago that under an Albanese government, free TAFE will be an enduring feature of Australia's educational system. 100,000 free TAFE places each and every year from 2027. And already, since we've come to power, 500,000 Australians have taken up the opportunity of free TAFE, and that includes 35,000 in construction, 49,000 in IT. This is accessible education, which is generating skills, which is transforming lives, which is building our nation's economy and making Australia smarter. But according to the Leader of the Opposition, all of that is just a waste. And perhaps we should not be surprised, because the Leader of the Opposition has opposed all of our cost-of-living measures, including free TAFE. He said no to energy bill relief twice. He said no to more affordable childcare. He said no to cheaper medicines. He said no to increases in the minimum wage. What is more surprising is that this Leader of the Opposition is teaming up with the other Leader of the Opposition in this chamber, the Leader of the Greens political party, and the two of them are having quite the love affair, because off in the Senate they have worked together to oppose the building of more social housing. They've worked together to oppose a more business-responsive environmental protection agency, and last night
they
worked together to oppose caps on international students. The Liberals and the Greens are working together on immigration. These two are holding hands, walking off into the sunset. They have completely abandoned everything they believe in, and they are cooperating simply to maximise the political damage to our country. So every Australian should be clear that if you vote Liberal or if you vote Green, here in Canberra it's just the one team. And all those parties over there are utterly committed to their own self-interest.
The Prime Minister completed his answer. Has the Acting Prime Minister completed his answer?
No.
The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on a point of order, I wonder if the Deputy Prime Minister can just clarify whether or not he's still providing preferences and accepting preferences from the Australian Greens.
The Acting Prime Minister is in his seat. The Minister for Defence Industry is now warned. The Leader of the Opposition has abused the standing orders in a grievous way. And I'm reluctant to do this, but he's now warned. We simply can't have people jumping up. If that was the case, there's no point of having question time. Rules are put in order. Standing orders are put in place so that we can run this effectively and efficiently. And if people are going to just take advantage or take the mickey, we're doing the people of Australia the disservice. So there's just far too much noise. Everyone's going to calm down. And we're just going to hear from the Acting Prime Minister for the remaining 16 seconds. Order. The Acting Prime Minister has the call.
Their embarrassment is manifest. Australians should also know when they vote Labor, they are voting for a government which is utterly focused on them, utterly focused on their household budgets and utterly focused on their future.
The member for Latrobe, I'm trying to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. You're warned. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Did the Australian government make any representations to the UK government for the reference to Australia contained in the press release titled UK and US join forces to speed up advanced nuclear technologies to be withdrawn?
Call to the Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for her question. The position of the Australian government has been completely clear. We're not signing this agreement. This agreement is in respect of two countries which both have a civil nuclear industry, and we do not. And it's completely clear that for Australia to—
Order.
Well, I take the interjection. The idea that the reactor in Lucas Heights is about to power cities around Australia says everything about how those opposite have no idea how nuclear energy works. I mean, the Leader of the Opposition was here earlier saying that all you need to do— The Leader of the Opposition came up here previously and said that all one needs to do is get some uranium together and burn it. And if we burn some uranium, that's how we'll create energy. I mean, that's the level of their understanding. And the idea that Lucas Heights, which is a research facility which produces medical isotopes, is somehow going to be a reactor which powers cities, says everything about how they have no idea what they are talking about.
The member for Mitchell will cease interjecting. Order. Order. The member for Braddon. Is the Deputy Leader seeking to take a point of order? She's entitled to do so under the standing orders, and she has the call.
The point of order is on relevance, and the question was very direct about whether representations were made to the UK government about the title of a press release, and the Acting Prime Minister could say yes or could say no.
Yes, he could say those things, but under the standing orders, as the Deputy Leader knows, he doesn't have to. He needs to remain directly relevant. So he needs to remain directly relevant to the policy topic and to the question that he was asked about, and I'll ensure that he follows the standing orders, just as I ensure everyone follows the standing orders. The Acting Prime Minister in continuation.
Well, what I am saying, Mr Speaker, is that the Australian government is not signing this agreement because it is agreement which goes to civil nuclear energy. That means nuclear reactors which provide energy to cities and to electricity grids, and we do not have that in this country. And so, as a result, this agreement is not relevant to Australia.
Call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. How are the Albanese Labor government's policies and reforms helping to close the gender pay gap and supporting women's economic security and equality? How does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Canberra for her question as well as her continued advocacy for progressing the cause of Australian women. This government is working every single day to make women's lives better, fairer and more equal. We've taken targeted action to improve women's economic security and equality and, of course, to close the gender pay gap. We've increased the pay for early childhood educators. We've secured record pay rises for hundreds of thousands of women on award wages. We've fixed the bargaining system to get wages moving in feminised industries. Under this government, women's average weekly earnings have increased $173.80 a week since May 2022. We've been publishing employer gender pay gaps to hold companies to account, and we've reached record highs in women's economic participation. Under Labor, the gender pay gap is the lowest it has ever been, 11.5%, down from 14.1% when we first came to office. Yesterday, the ACTU released research that shows that our policies are closing the gender pay gap at a rate 3 times faster than it did under those opposite. We're closing the gender pay gap at a rate of 1.3% per year compared to a rate of 0.4% under the coalition. If we had continued down the path of those opposite and not done the hard work of implementing policies such as making gender equality an object of the Fair Work Act, expanding paid parental leave and banning pay secrecy, the average full-time working woman in Australia would be $1,900 a year worse off than they are now. The research, of course, also points to a whole-of-government commitment to gender pay equality through our national strategy, and putting women at the centre of our economic agenda is making a difference. We've made these changes because women deserve economic security, they deserve economic equality. And we've made these changes because we want to put women at the centre of our economic agenda, and those policies are working. Now, I'm asked about other policies. The Liberals and Nationals have not put forward a single meaningful policy to improve outcomes for women. They've opposed many of Labor's reforms that have delivered those real outcomes for women. It is frankly clear that this Leader of the Opposition is a risk to this progress, the progress of women's equality, because we know his record. We know that his record of pushing wages down, pushing prices up and not supporting all of the measures that Labor has put into place to make sure we actually close the gender pay gap. The Leader of the Opposition's reckless arrogance has real costs for Australian women. His agenda is wrong for Australia and it is wrong for Australia's women.
Before I call the member for Brisbane, I'll just do some quick acknowledgements. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today as guests of the member for Bass is the Mayor of the City of Launceston, Matthew Garwood, the CEO of the City of Launceston, Sam Johnson, and the CEO of Regional Development Australia, Tasmania, James McKee. In the gallery today is also a delegation of business and industry leaders from tropical North Queensland, led by Advanced Cairns, and in collaboration with Tourism Tropical North Queensland and the Cairns Chamber of Commerce. Also joining us today is the Honourable Mark Monaghan, former member for Fong Lim and the 14th Speaker of the Northern Territory Legislative Assembly, and also a delegation from the Pharmacy Guild of Australia National Council. On behalf of all members, welcome to you all. And I give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Students and young people are saddled with billions of dollars of student debt. These debts can be in the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands of dollars, making it harder for people to get their first home and to make ends meet. If the government can introduce its bill for free TAFE this week, why can't a bill to wipe 20% of student debt be introduced this week as well? Why should young people and students be forced to wait to see the outcome of an election when the government could work with the Greens to get this done now?
Order. Order. The member for Griffith will cease interjecting. So will the Assistant Foreign Minister. The Acting Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. If the member is going to the legislative productivity of this parliament, that could be improved if the Greens actually supported government legislation instead of teaming up with their partners here, the Liberals, to make sure that they ultimately oppose everything. But the member did raise the policy, which is an important policy, which was announced by the Prime Minister, which is doing something about the increasing student debt that we are seeing in our country, and that is removing 20% of the debt that is incurred or that is held by those who have gone through university and have incurred a student debt. Now, that is a step that has been taken, which is being opposed by those opposite, to actually improve the cost of living, but improve the lives of those who study and make university and study in this country much more accessible. So Australians know that when they vote for this government, they are getting a government which is going to be focused on cost of living, but focused on the cost of living impacts in terms of education. Fee-free TAFE, making sure that that is accessible to all Australians, and reducing student debt. That is the focus of our government. That has been the focus of our education policy. That has been the focus of our Prime Minister. And I would encourage the Greens, if they are so fervent in their support of this, to reflect that support in the way in which they behave in this parliament.
Call to the member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. Why is today's announcement of the first investments for the National Reconstruction Fund for Australian manufacturing and Australian jobs so important? And what risks are there to the future of these jobs?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Patterson, who's a huge supporter of regional manufacturing. And today is a landmark day for Australian manufacturing. It's the day that the Albanese government delivers on our promise to back Australian manufacturing, that we are a country that makes things, that we can stand on our own 2 feet, that we aren't dependent on vulnerable or concentrated supply chains, and that in the process we can make secure, well-paying jobs in our regions and in our suburbs. And today, the NRF announced a $40 million investment in Toowoomba's Russell Mineral Equipment, an Australian success story. Since 1985, making cutting-edge mining equipment, employing 450 workers, exporting 90% of what they make, and $1 billion of earnings for our country, and overseas investors always knocking on their door, trying to take them off our shores and the jobs that are with them. But the NRF, teaming up with private investors, has basically kept Russell Mineral Equipment in Aussie hands. Regional jobs safe. And Dr John Russell, who founded RME, a proud Australian who says we can do whatever we turn our minds to. And he says, and I quote, the NRF is a blessing for Australian manufacturers.
Order.
Now, I'm asked about risks. Well, the risks are all the negativity from that side. I noticed they put out a statement in relation to the NRF. It was less a statement, more a ticker tape of criticism, of negativity, wringing their hands about the fact that we're backing in Australian manufacturing. So negative.
Order.
They boo Santa. They boo Santa. 'Tis the season to be jolly unless you're a lib or a nat. 'Tis the season to be jolly. And you don't have much to be proud about, do you? In office, they saw off 100,000 manufacturing jobs. We created 70,000 of them. They saw off 100,000. They sneered and they goaded and they dared Australian car manufacturers to leave our shores. Wouldn't back the National Reconstruction Fund. And on top of that, Speaker, they would not back energy price relief that shielded manufacturers from the worst of energy price rises. They have nothing to be proud about, no ideas, no plans for Australian manufacturing. They'll always turn up for the photo op, but they're never there to back up Australian manufacturing. And frankly, all want to take Australian manufacturing backwards and the country with it. We think better can be done, and we are showing how that will happen.
Has concluded. Before I call the member for Canning, the member for O'Connor, the member for Fisher was warned in the first question and has continued his interjections despite knowing the rules, so he'll now leave the chamber under 94A. Just remind everyone there's consequences for actions in this place. So if you get warned, it's a really big tip. Don't interject, no matter who you are. Call to the honourable member for Canning.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Why did Labor sign up to the AUKUS nuclear submarine program when Australia had no pre-existing Australian nuclear submarine industry?
Order. 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 The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Barker, we haven't started the answer yet. So members on my right will cease interjecting. Members on my left will join them so we can hear the Acting Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I really do appreciate the question from the Shadow Minister, but it does worry me that the Shadow Defence Minister of this country doesn't understand submarines 101. But then again, that perhaps should not be a surprise because those opposite the ones who gave us a 10-year capability gap in our submarines as they were in and out of a deal with Japan, then in and out of a deal with France, and it was not until the 9th year of their government that they actually came up with a solution to the successor of our Collins-class submarines. And really, they've only succeeded in that solution by virtue of the fact that they were elected out of office a few months later, and Labor has been the ones who have been able to deliver it. The answer to the Shadow Minister's question goes directly to the question of our nation's submarine capability. We know that in order to have an enduring long-range submarine capability into the 2030s and 2040s, which matches the capability that in fact we had in the 2000s with the introduction of the Collins class, we have to move from a diesel-electric powered submarine to a nuclear-powered submarine, and we make no apology for that. But what is astonishing is that the Brains Trust over here, Mr Speaker—
Members on my left, the member for Fairfax.
What is astonishing is that the Brains Trust over here, Mr Speaker, somehow believe that 8 nuclear reactors, which will each power a single machine, somehow is the basis for them grounding a policy to establish a civil nuclear industry in this country which is intended to power cities and states and, in fact, the entire nation. It is the equivalent of saying that there is a similarity between a coal-fired power station and a lawnmower because they both burn hydrocarbons. It says everything about how they do not understand what is at stake here. The simple fact is this. If this country moves down the path of a civil nuclear industry under this leader of the opposition, this country will be embracing the most expensive form of energy, the most expensive form of electricity. And no amount of these questions can escape that fact. $1,200 per household extra. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about it in 20 years' time. And in 20 years' time, we're only talking about 4% of the electricity grid. That's what their policy amounts to. That's why it's a dog of a policy.
Call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Why is decent pay such an important part of the Albanese Labor government's efforts to help ease cost of living pressures? How does this approach differ from what has failed in the past?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, thanks to the member for Boothby for her great question and an even better representation, Mr Speaker. Inflation is coming down, wages are going up, and cost of living relief is rolling out to every taxpayer and to every corner of our country. 1 million more people are working, they are earning more, they are keeping more of what they earn, and participation in work is at record highs. Now, consumer confidence is still relatively weak, but it's rising. It rose again today in new numbers today, the highest in a couple of years, and it showed that household confidence in the 12-month economic outlook has risen almost 11 points since the tax cuts began in July. So, Mr Speaker, we know when it comes to the cost of living it's far from mission accomplished because people are still doing it tough, but we have made some really substantial progress together. Inflation's more than halved, it's back in the Reserve Bank's target band. The underlying measure has come down a lot as well, Mr Speaker. Now, I remind the House that those opposite said that it wasn't possible to have inflation moderating substantially and wages growing strongly. And not for the first time, Mr Speaker, they have been spectacularly wrong. We've got wages growing, we've got inflation falling, and that means that we are seeing real wages growth in our economy for 4 consecutive quarters in the new data that came out last week. And as the Infrastructure Minister pointed out a moment ago, one of the things that we are proudest of is that the gender pay gap is now the lowest on record. The ACTU Minding the Gap report released today shows that if the previous slow rate of progress under those opposite had continued, women would be $1,900 a year worse off than they are now. Under this government as well, minimum wage earners have got $7,000 extra per annum, and there's wage rises for aged care and early childhood educators. And that's because we see decent wages as part of the solution to this cost of living challenge and not part of the problem. But not everyone in here agrees. We know that the opposition leader doesn't. We know that the Leader of the Opposition is a risk to wages because we know his record, gutting Medicare and coming after wages and pushing wages down. And that's why real wages were falling when those opposite were in office. 9 years of deliberate wage stagnation because they want Australians working longer for less. Now, this, Mr Speaker, is one of the many ways that the opposition leader's reckless arrogance has real costs for real people in real communities. Australians would go backwards under him and under them. This side of the House has got real wages moving again, but we know that Australians are still doing it tough. That's why we're coming at this cost of living challenge from every responsible angle, and progress on decent pay is a big part of our efforts.
Call to the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. Following the 2007 election with no mandate, then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd massively increased migration under what he called a Big Australia policy. Prime Minister Rudd appointed the now Immigration Minister as the Minister for Population to help deliver his Big Australia policy. Acting Prime Minister, is net overseas migration currently higher or lower than under Kevin Rudd's Big Australia policy?
Call to the order. The Minister for Social Services is warned. No one is to interject before a minister begins their answer. The Leader of the House has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I rarely thank shadow ministers for their questions, but I'm really grateful for that one. I am really grateful for that one, because I'm asked that on the exact day that those opposite commit publicly that they are going to vote to push net oversized migration higher. That's a decision that they've made today. Today they have made the decision and announced it in a press conference where you can see him desperately trying, don't give the grab, talk about everything other than what he's actually doing. They have decided that one of the areas where this parliament can put some control on net overseas migration, because let's face it, you don't have control over every lever. Part of it, for example, is Australian citizens. No. Unless you believe that we should control how many Australian citizens come home, is that your view? Do you think we should put a restriction on Australian citizens coming home? Because that feeds into net overseas migration. But apparently you don't know that. Do you think we should put limits on whether Australian citizens are allowed to work overseas? Because that's part of net overseas migration. But the one that we can have an impact on, student visas, you've decided to let it go sky high.
Just going to get the leader to pause. And we're going to hear from the member for Wannon, who's entitled to raise a point of order under the standing orders.
It goes to relevance. The former Minister for Population, now Minister for Immigration, was asked a very simple question. Is net overseas migration higher or lower than under Kevin Rudd's Big Australia policy? Very simple.
The member for Wannon knows being directly relevant to the question has to be adhered to under the standing orders, and the minister was talking about immigration levels and numbers, so he is being directly relevant. If he was talking about another topic, the member for Deakin, you're not helping either. So we're just going to take the temperature down. We're going to listen to the answer. We're going to make sure the minister is being directly relevant to the question he was asked about net migration, and he has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. So, of course, those opposite apparently don't know what the different constituent parts of net overseas migration are. So let me just give one of the easiest stats for them to know.
The member for Hume is really not helping. So I'm going to ask him to cease interjecting in light of the remarks I made earlier today. Let's just get through this answer. The minister has the call.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker. I do want to get through this answer because they want to compare, and of course Australia over time, net overseas migration has gone up, and so if you take that 2010 benchmark, what year was the highest? When did we hit a record number of visas issued? When did we hit 9.6 million visas issued? The biggest upward pressure you could get on net overseas migration. 2017 to 2018. And who do you think was in charge overseeing issuing each of those 9.6 million visas granted? The Leader of the Opposition now. And so out of full respect to him, out of full respect, that media conference and their decision today was completely true to form, because while they will run the opposite rhetoric, every time they have had the chance, they have put upward pressure after upward pressure, and this time they've made an announcement that they will vote for more upward pressure, that they will vote to let it rip on however many student visas get issued, however many come in, although I'll say any immigration minister in the future will have a hell of a time trying to catch up with the number of visas issued by that man.
Order. Give the call. Order. Members on my right, the member for Reid. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government cutting costs for Australians so they can get the skills they need for the jobs they want? And is there any opposition to this?
Give the call to the Minister for... The Minister will pause. The member for Herbert will cease rejecting. The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, this has been a pattern from the government in questions which I'd suggest to you are not consistent with Standing Order 98C, ministers can be questioned on matters for which they're responsible or officially connected. By definition, the minister is not responsible for opposition.
The Deputy Leader of the House.
Thank you, Speaker. This is a very common part of questions. The former government made an absolute art form of it, so it doesn't really sit very well in the opposition manager's mouth to object to it now after 9 years of it.
I'm just going to listen carefully. Oh, the Leader of the House.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, if I can just refer to page 553 of practice, where it refers to what constitutes matter relating to a minister's public responsibilities, which concludes public affairs, which that tag clearly goes to.
Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Veterans Affairs, the Manager of Opposition Business. Further to the point of order.
Structured to deal with firstly what the minister is responsible for and then opposition. It could not be clearer on the wording of the question that what the minister is being asked about is not within his responsibilities.
Whilst this has been a feature of question time for a very long time, certainly as long as I've been here, about the compare and contrast, I'm just going to listen carefully to the minister to make sure. Obviously, he can't have an answer, and the manager is correct simply about alternative approaches, because he wasn't asked about alternative approaches. He was asked about opposition. Now, I hope that's not just going to be one part of what the opposition could be. So I'm just going to make sure his answer reflects on what he's doing and has responsibility for, but also ensuring that it's just not an answer simply about alternative policies or approaches, because he wasn't asked about that. I hope that's clear to everyone in terms of what the minister can and can't do, and if he strays from that, I will have to take action. Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank you, Speaker, and thanks for your guidance too. And I thank the member for his question. As he knows, Labor is bringing costs down so that more Australians can access high-quality, affordable training. Free TAFE is delivering the training that Australians want and the skills they need to get ahead. And this morning I was so pleased to be part of a ceremony that welcomed our skilleroos, vet students from around Australia who competed so well on the global scale at the World Skills event in France. Now, these skilleroos were also joined by free TAFE students from the Canberra Institute of Technology, students in nursing, early childhood, individual support, as well as mechanical apprentices. And as I welcomed MPs and senators from across the aisle, including the member for Farrer, the Shadow Minister, to celebrate our world-class TAFE and vet students. Now, the contribution of these students to building Australia's future simply cannot be overstated, and it was so good to speak with them, to celebrate their achievements and to discuss how it's inspiring others. And on this point, I spoke with Lachlan from Western Australia, who told me about the importance of fee-free TAFE to him. Now, Labor is listening to students like Lachlan, and Labor is bringing people together, working with all states and territories, Liberal as well as Labor, putting TAFE at the heart of our skills and training system. Last year, we brought in fee-free TAFE, and 500,000 Australians have enrolled. We're supporting these Australians by bringing their costs down, and we're opening the doors of opportunity. Now, I was asked if there's any opposition to this, and shortly after this morning's event, members will be shocked but not surprised to hear the Shadow Minister, she snuck away. She turned her back on these TAFE students, announcing that the Coalition will oppose our free TAFE bill. It is a shame, but for years on this side of the House we have fought against the Liberals' resentment towards public education and against their efforts to undermine TAFEs. And we always will. We always will. There will be no free TAFE places under the Liberals, who still call this wasteful spending. They will cut this cost of living support. They refuse to allocate $1 towards the hard-working Australians getting the skills they need for the jobs we need. And last time they were in government, we saw the damage their disregard for the vet system and skilling Australians did. They left Australia with the worst skills shortage in 50 years. And now, worse than that, they are standing in the way of us fixing it, while slamming the door shut on hundreds and thousands of Australians looking to get skills they want, whilst we are assisting them with cost of living pressures, showing arrogance towards the students and recklessness towards the needs of our economy. But, Speaker, as long as there is a Labor government, free TAFE is here to stay.
Call to the honourable member for Page.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Acting Deputy Prime Minister. Acting Prime Minister, what mandate does this government have to increase our population by a projected 1.6 million over the next 5 years, the biggest intake in Australian history, to rip funds out of infrastructure, creating a housing crisis and to destroy our economy and the cost of living? Given the Prime Minister refuses to take responsibility for his government's bad decisions, which are hurting the economy and Australian families, will his deputy take responsibility?
Order. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I thank the Shadow Minister for the stream of consciousness. You have to make a decision as to whether you want to take action to contain and start to put downward pressure on the number of people who are arriving in Australia or not. And that doesn't involve media conference, it involves decisions. Now, there is a decision that this government took that we would put restraint on the number of student visas. That's one of the areas that government can quite directly control. I was reminded by a colleague after the last answer that those opposite actually were willing to put restrictions on whether Australian citizens could come into the country, but that's not something that we're about to do. But if you are not willing to vote, for measures that will put downward pressure on net overseas migration, then just acknowledge you're going to let it rip. Like, if that's the actual approach, but if you do as the opposition has decided to do today, which is to think they can run their rhetoric in one direction and their actions in the other, that sort of reckless arrogance gets found out, and this Leader of the Opposition was found out today. Because today, despite all the rhetoric, he had a decision as to whether or not to act on net overseas migration, and he has made an active decision. So for anybody out there who might feel that they're missing out on a rental accommodation because an overseas student is taken, just know the Leader of the Opposition wants to make that situation worse. If anybody out there is thinking that because of the rate of immigration they're having trouble getting into a home, just know the Leader of the Opposition has decided to make that worse. And if you decide that you're going to not take the cuts, that you're not going to take the cuts on something like student visas, then the large area of the caseload that's left in terms of where the big numbers are skilled visas. And where does it go if you make the cuts on the people we need to get here to build the homes? You end up with the Leader of the Opposition going down a pathway that hits in both directions. You made this decision, you've got to own it now. Too late to retreat.
The Minister's completed his answer. The call to the member for McEwen.
This is the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to improve integrity and sustainability of the international education sector? Are there alternative approaches?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend the marvellous member for McEwen for that question. I was at a school in his electorate with his granddaughter Ava just last week. Mr Speaker, since COVID, international students are back, but so are the shonks and the crooks who feed off this sector, using it as a backdoor for people to work here. We've got to take action to protect the integrity of this sector, and that's what the legislation that's in the Senate does. But we also need to protect community support for this sector as well. And 70% of Australians agree that the government should be able to put a cap or a limit on the number of international students that come to our country every year. And that's what this legislation that's in the Senate does.
Mr Speaker, we make no apology for working to bring migration back to pre-pandemic levels, and a key part of that is putting a limit on the number of international students who come to this country every year. And up until this week, the Liberal Party agreed with that. In the biggest speech that an opposition leader ever makes in any given year at that dispatch box, the opposition leader got up in May and said this. He said that he would, quote, set a cap on foreign students. About an hour ago, he did a press conference just out there where he said, quote, we are happy for there to be a cap, end of quote. But that means nothing unless you're prepared to vote for it. And this opposition leader has just instructed his team down in the Senate to vote against legislation to put a cap on the number of international students. That legislation doesn't set a number, Pete. It just sets a power to create a cap, and you're voting against it. Never in my life did I expect to see this opposition leader get into bed with the Greens on immigration, but that is exactly what is happening. We shouldn't be surprised, because for this reckless, arrogant opposition leader, it's never about the public interest or the national interest. It's always about his private and political interest, even if it means getting into bed with the Greens. Now, the opposition leaders talked about the Group of 8 today. Let me remind him, they've put out a statement welcoming your decision to block this. That should tell you everything about what they think that you're doing. I've got a letter from 16 small and regional universities telling us that they want this. 70% of the Australian people say they want this, and the Liberal Party and the National Party and the Greens are getting into bed to stop this. Australians are fast starting to realise they can't trust this bloke on anything.
Before I call the member for Kennedy, I just want to do one more acknowledgement. You'll get the call. I'm pleased to advise the House, as a result from the member for Dawson letting me know, that there's a delegation from GW3, mayors from Mackay, Isaac, Whitsundays and their CEOs. 9 mayors in total. Welcome to you all. Give a call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Leader of the House, in the Queensland election, the LNP averred, do the crime, do the time, a flagrant lie. The jails had been full and overflowing for 3 years. Then a vote for KP is a vote for Labor. Perish the thought. Another lie. Townsville's crime rate warranted KP detouring from his trademark alternative, how to vote, and actually preferencing the Liberals. Oh, well, shame, but anyway. The muckraking, dredging up a youth indiscretion. Leader, would you agree LNP's strategies successful? LNP moral conviction in the gutter.
I have some difficulties with that question, only because it is asking for opinion, but it's a very broad. The member for Kennedy does not have the call. The leader is willing to answer the question. It's barely within standing orders, but we'll give it a go.
Yeah, I'll give it a go, Mr Speaker. And the question goes to the conviction of people's views when they get to the House as Leader of the House. And with the member for Kennedy, who I've had many portfolios over the years where he has lobbied me right back from when I had the agriculture portfolio back in 2007, or even immigration as a shadow. And I will say for the member for Kennedy, what he says outside the House, what he lobbies you with privately, and how he votes inside the House are always the same thing. And whether you agree or disagree with the views of the member for Kennedy, he is always fearlessly in support of his electorate, and he always has utter conviction in how he votes in this chamber. I can compare and contrast that behaviour because It would not be consistent with the rogue point of order that the Leader of the Opposition gave today for the opposition to then be voting with the Greens on, of all things, housing, the environment and immigration. And yet they have a unity ticket now on all three of those. The member for Kennedy would never do anything like that. But housing, environment and immigration, voting Liberal or voting Green, gives you the same outcome in this chamber and in the Senate. The reckless arrogance of the announcement today is extraordinary. To claim and to make the case of the connections between immigration and housing and then to decide to vote that there be no cap is reckless arrogance beyond belief.
The Leader of the House will pause. The member for Page on a point of order.
Yeah, a point of order of relevance, Speaker. I think you were very lenient to allow the question to be in order, but the minister now is straying across a whole board. It's all compare and contrast. It's all about this side of the parliament and out of order.
To be fair, the question was framed in that way, and I wasn't comfortable with the broad nature of it. And order, and as members know, I try and allow all questions in where possible, as what I try to give everyone a fair go. And given the broad nature, and the minister was happy to ask the question, and the huge relevance issue within that question, it's going to be hard for me to make sure everything isn't directly relevant. So just if the minister can...
No, Mr Speaker, and I accept the caution that's made, because the question actually made no reference to the member for Kennedy, but made multiple references to the LNP, so I will stay relevant to that for the remainder of the answer. Because the Leader of the Opposition wants to make it harder for people. He wants to make people worse off. And the example today with the announcement in the Senate is part of a consistent pattern from this Leader of the Opposition. Why did they vote no to energy bill relief? Because they want to make it harder for people. He wants to make people worse off. Why are they opposing free TAFE? Another announcement today. Because he wants to make people worse off. Why are they opposing the cutting of student debt? Because he wants to make people worse off. Why did they oppose cheaper medicines? Because he wants to make people worse off. Every single element that comes before this House on cost of living, when he has an opportunity to show conviction, he runs a mile every time. And don't look at what he says, don't look at the rhetoric, look at how he votes. On immigration, environment and housing, he votes with the Greens, and on cost of living, he votes no to helping people every single time.
With the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How many renewable energy projects has the Albanese Labor government approved? How will these projects ease the cost of living for all Australians? And what government approaches how do government approaches differ to other proposals?
Call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Bendigo for her question. I know that she is a great supporter of lower power bills for people who live in her electorate and for the businesses in her electorate. She supports the $300 energy bill rebate, and she supports cheaper, cleaner, renewable energy. And I'm very pleased to report, Mr Speaker, that the government has now approved 65 renewable energy projects. That is more than enough to power well over 7 million homes across Australia. And the most recent one is right up the road from the member for Bendigo, the 250-megawatt Muskerry solar power station. That will produce enough renewable energy to power more than twice as many homes as in the Greater Bendigo area. And what is terrific about this proposal, or this proposal that will go ahead, is that it was approved in just 20 business days. So, as well as more renewable energy, we have doubled on-time approvals since coming to government. Now, of course, the renewable energy transition is cracking along under this government. That means that we're already seeing falls in wholesale power prices down around 16%. What is the biggest risk to this? The biggest risk to this is the uncosted, risky
20-year in the future renewable nuclear energy fantasy proposed by those opposite. It's going to cost around $600 billion. It's going to take 20 years. It will add $1,200 to bills. And one of the things that is truly troubling about it is that it will keep coal in our system for much longer, and because of that will add around 1.7 billion tonnes of extra carbon dioxide pollution to our atmosphere. So we've got a real choice. We've got a slow, risky, expensive transition to nuclear, or a fast, certain transition to renewables that's already happening under us. You've got $1,200 added to domestic power bills under those opposite. You've got the $300 energy bill relief under us, and cheaper renewables for families and businesses.
Order. The member for Hume has the call.
My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. RBA Governor Michelle Bullock has said that aggregate demand in the economy is still too high and, quote, what's keeping the level high is population growth. Given population under Labor has increased by a record 1.67 million, can the Acting Prime Minister confirm that this government's Big Australia approach is putting upward pressure on inflation?
No, we're going to do this again because there was far too many interjections. The Treasurer will pause. The Treasurer will just resume his seat. The Minister for Infrastructure. We can't have— I don't know why this is so hard. Members are entitled to ask their questions in silence and should be shown the respect without snide or comments on either side. In case you haven't worked it out, I'm not a fan of that. So we're just going to do this properly and invite the member for Hume, because he's earned the respect to ask his question, and I want everyone to show it to him. He has the call.
My question is to the Acting Prime Minister. RBA Governor Michelle Bullock has said that aggregate demand in the economy is still too high and, quote, what's keeping the level high is population growth. Given population under Labor has increased by a record 1.67 million people, can the Acting Prime Minister confirm that this government's Big Australia approach is putting upward pressure on inflation?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, it must be 3 o'clock, Mr Speaker. I welcome the question from the Shadow Treasurer. I say to the Shadow Treasurer and to his colleagues, they need to decide, do they want immigration to be lower or higher? Because they say they want it to be lower, but then they say they'll vote for it to be higher. They have to make up their mind, as the Minister has pointed out to them repeatedly today. Now, I'm asked what the RBA Governor has said about some of these matters, and the two most important things that Governor Bullock has said is, first of all, public demand is not the main game when it comes to the outlook for inflation, and secondly, that the government has the right attitude when it comes to inflation. She couldn't be clearer. The Governor of the Reserve Bank couldn't be clearer, Mr Speaker. Now, the Shadow Treasurer could be a little clearer. The Shadow Treasurer could be a little clearer. And the reason why his colleagues have been in the Saturday paper saying he's vacated the field and he's not providing any direction and he's just throwing rocks is because, Mr Speaker, he has provided absolutely no coherent, costed or credible economic policies.
The Minister for Social Services on a warning. Order. The Minister for Regional Development is now warned. Completely inappropriate to interject while someone's trying to raise a point of order. The member for Hume has asked his question. Now he's entitled to raise a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was very specifically about the Big Australia strategy of this government, with population growing by 1.67 million, and how that is driving up inflation.
The question was specific, so I'm just going to make sure that I didn't hear exactly what the Treasurer said because I was talking to the Leader of the Opposition about an important matter, but I thank the member for helping me out. The Treasurer has just got to ensure that he remains directly relevant.
I said at the beginning, Mr Speaker, if the Shadow Treasurer has that view, why is he voting for even higher migration with the position that they've announced on the student caps? They've got to make up their mind. They say they want lower migration, but they're voting for higher migration, and that's because they put their own political interests ahead of the national economic interest. And I went through the things that Governor Bullock has said about the government's policy and how it relates to inflation, the right attitude, helpful to surpluses and the like, Mr Speaker. Now, we've been clear, the governor's been clear, those opposite haven't been clear. The reason why those opposite are saying of the Shadow Treasurer he's vacated the field and not providing direction and just throwing rocks is because he has no coherent, credible or costed alternatives, Mr Speaker. So to learn what they think about the budget and inflation, we've got to go to the Deputy Liberal Leader, Mr Speaker, who said today about free TAFE, and I'm quoting, "Remember this, it's a key principle and tenet of the Liberal Party. If you don't pay for something, you don't value it." Now, Mr Speaker, the reason why this is relevant,
Just pause a moment. Just pause a moment. We'll get through this. I don't want the Treasurer straying into alternative policies and approaches unless he is making it directly relevant to his answer. So I can appreciate where he's going, but I'm going to listen carefully, otherwise I'll have to sit him down. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When it comes to budget settings and demand, the Deputy Liberal Leader has said if you don't pay for something, you don't value it. And here we draw a direct line between the approach they're taking on fee-free TAFE, voting against it, and what this opposition leader did when he came after universal Medicare, when he came after universal health care. And the point that I'm making is the reason why we know that these characters are a risk is because we know their record. They vote against education caps. They vote against fee-free TAFE. They went after universal Medicare last time, and that's why they are a risk to household budgets and to inflation.
Has concluded. We'll hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening our international trade relationships to benefit Australian farmers?
Good call to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank our great member for Gilmore. She is a terrific supporter of Australian farmers. She knows how important they are to our country and how respected they are in our country and indeed around the world. Here at home, our agriculture sector employs hundreds of thousands of people, Mr Speaker. The total value of agriculture, fisheries and forestry production has increased around 47% over the last 20 years. Indeed, it hit a record level of $100 billion in 2022-23, $100 billion. And our Aussie farmers continue feeding the world through $76 billion worth of agriculture, fisheries and forestry exports annually. We have the globe's best produce, and the world knows it, Mr Speaker. That's why it was such an honour to represent Australian farmers last week at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Ministers' meeting. Indeed, for more than 3 decades, APEC has been vital for promoting open and inclusive rules-based trade and practical market-orientated regulatory reform in our region, Mr Speaker. It was clear that among—
The Minister's going to pause. The Minister's just going to pause, so that means not saying anything. The Leader of the Nationals is not going to just give a running commentary all through the answer, and same alongside the Deputy Leader, just to continually to be back and forth and back and forth. We're just not going to have that for the remainder of the answer. It's unbecoming. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm surprised they're not supporting our farmers. I mean, it was very clear amongst the 21 member economies of APEC, where the Prime Minister and I met with a number of our counterparts, that Australia is considered a critical partner globally, not only for trade but for helping the direction of the rules-based order that our trade relies on, Mr Speaker. We punch above our weight internationally, and I'm proud to be part of a government that's restored our international standing. Since the election, the Albanese Labor government has been working successfully to strengthen our trading relationships across the APEC region and indeed around the world, Mr Speaker. And of course it's ensuring more trade with more trading partners. And this means more jobs here at home in Australia. Today, 1 in 4 jobs is dependent on our trade, Mr Speaker, 1 in 4 jobs in this country. It also means more opportunities for Aussie farmers. We've seen our hard work pay off through the stabilisation of our relationship with our largest trading partner in China. Well, we inherited, of course, from those opposite $20 billion in trade impediments. We have removed most of those, Mr Speaker, delivering big wins for wine, grains, red meat and seafood. And in the past year, these wins have now seen record-breaking exports of agricultural products to China, Mr Speaker. We've delivered a new free trade agreement with the UAE, and indeed that's our first in the Middle East region, and I talked about that in this place just a few weeks ago. Importantly, Mr Speaker, we recorded 88 market access achievements to open, improve, maintain and restore access, including 10 new markets. We are now exporting over 70% of our agriculture, fisheries and forestry production to 169 markets globally, Mr Speaker. This is our highest and most diversified trade ever.
Give the call to the honourable member for Calais.
To the Health Minister. The rural doctor shortage crisis is having devastating consequences for the health of our residents in central western New South Wales. Gulgong no longer has any doctors. Practices in communities like Mudgee, Molong and Canowindra have closed their books to new patients, and it takes 2 months to see a doctor in Wellington. What are you doing to fix this appalling situation, and will you personally visit our region and meet with local doctors and concerned residents to see the shocking effects this crisis is having?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and his interest, obviously, in his community broadly, but particularly about the challenges in delivering good quality health care in regional Australia. We've had a couple of discussions about this already. Let me say a little bit about what we're trying to do to address, frankly, a real shortage of doctors in rural Australia. We've delivered more doctors over the last couple of years. The last 2 years have seen the biggest increase to doctor numbers in a decade. Now, that's not fixing every problem in every single community, but more doctors, more bulk billing, more urgent care clinics are starting to turn around the challenges that we inherited. But we know there are a range of different levers we need to pull. We put in place in our first budget a range of increased incentives for doctors to practice in communities like the members' community, a range of dollar incentives that are very significant and particularly reward doctors moving to regional Australia with the skills that we need. They might be emergency management skills, they might be mental health skills or obstetrician and gynaecology skills. We've also, through the Minister for Education, put in place very significant help debt relief for medical and nursing graduates who move to regional Australia. Depending on the level of regionality, they will have very significant reductions in their university debt or student debt. We've put in place a number of single employer model trials, including in New South Wales, to try and deal with the industrial disadvantages that GP registrars face in regional communities compared to their hospital-based equivalents as well. And the bulk billing changes that we put in place 12 months ago are benefiting regional Australia more than our cities. We know that about 40% of the more than 5 million additional free visits to the doctor that took place over the last 12 months happened in regional Australia. Now, we know there is more to do. We've got GP incentive funds that are seeking to plug some of the holes that the member just referred to. I met with a terrific delegation from North Queensland earlier today where that's been able to address the sort of challenges the member has talked about. I'm more than happy to sit down directly with the member, as I have done with, for example, the member for Kennedy, to deal with the doctor glut in doctor shortage in Cardwell and in Mission Beach in Queensland. If there's the sort of approach that we took there can help with the members' community, I'm more than happy to sit down with him, and I'll reach out soon.
Give the call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How are Medicare urgent care clinics making it easier for Australians to see a doctor, and are there any threats to the continued success of these clinics?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Blair for his question. He knows that a big part of our plans to strengthen Medicare was to roll out a network of Medicare urgent care clinics, open 7 days a week, extended hours and, very importantly, Mr Speaker, fully bulk billed. We promised to open 50 clinics last year and we opened 58. We promised to open 29 more clinics this year, Mr Speaker, and all 29 will be opened by the end of next month. And already 900,000 Australians have gone through these clinics since last June. 1 in 3 of them kids under the age of 15. 1 in 3 visiting during the weekend, and every single one of them fully bulk billed, Mr Speaker. And last week I was delighted to visit the Ipswich Medicare Urgent Care Clinic with the member for Blair. It was open pretty early, and already it's seen 12,500 people from the member for Blair's electorate, taking real pressure off the emergency department of the local hospital there. We're told that semi-urgent and non-urgent presentations to that ED are down by 25%. 25%. But it's not just relief for the local hospital, Mr Speaker. Those patients are getting top-quality care in a timely fashion, completely free of charge. Now, I have literally page after page of positive Google reviews for the Ipswich Urgent Care Clinic. I only have time to name a couple of them, Mr Speaker, and maybe I'll table the rest of them. But Esther said, I went in on a Saturday night.
Order.
I saw someone within 10 minutes, out the door in 20,
Order.
happy and friendly staff.
my
This is a great substitute to the emergency department or waiting days to see a GP, Mr Speaker. Kerry said, I went in for a suspected broken foot and I was seen by the triage within 10 minutes and had my results back within an hour. Great service to take the pressure off the ED, Mr Speaker. I could go on if standing orders allowed me, Mr Speaker. I could go on. Mr Speaker, we promised the Australian people we would strengthen Medicare. We would make it stronger. We're delivering more doctors. We're delivering more bulk billing, and we're opening more Medicare urgent care clinics. And while this is making a real difference, including to the people in the member for Blair's electorate, we know there is more to do, Mr Speaker. We know there is more to do, but we also know that those opposite in the Liberal Party pose a direct threat to that progress, a very direct threat. Just this morning, yet again, the Shadow Treasurer was out on radio saying that our investments to strengthen Medicare and deliver cheaper medicines would be on the chopping block under a Dotton government. Bulk billing would go back into freefall under those opposite. Medicines would become dearer, not cheaper, and, Mr Speaker, the Medicare urgent care clinics will close. That's what you'll get from the Liberal Party.
Call to the Acting Prime Minister. The Acting Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Before